webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, I'm Melissa Mata. I'm the Municipal Research Analyst here at the Colorado Municipal League. Thank you for attending today's webinar. Those of you who are elected officials who have registered will receive 1 university training credit. And this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website. For those of you who aren't familiar with the webinar format, you should see a control panel to the top right of the screen. You have an orange arrow to the left of the panel, which will minimize the entire box. All participants will be muted for the webinar, but are encouraged to ask questions by typing them into the question box on the control panel. Our presenters today are Elizabeth Garner, the Colorado State Demographer, and Lily Griego, Partnership Specialist with the U.S. Census Bureau. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Elizabeth.
Great, thank you very much. So today we're going to be going over some updates to planning for Census 2020. And typically the first question, am I not hitting the right thing?
We'll just select it and try.
Now it's, thank you. You told me that earlier. Typically the first question that most people come up with is, why do we do this? And the big piece is that it's been in the Constitution, and it's part of Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution that we count every person in the United States. Some of the big reasons, I'm going to spend some more time on some separate slides going over this, is for federal reapportionment, and then we've got redistricting, as well as funding, and then maybe most importantly, for our own planning purposes. When we're looking at reapportionment, that is really the process of reapportioning the U.S. House of Representatives across the United States. And it's a fairly complex mathematical formula that enables that every state at least has 1 representative, plus then it's a portion based on population. So right now, looking at some information that came out recently in January of 2018, Colorado is in the running for potentially gaining an additional congressional seat. If everyone's counting, now the margin of error on that was 9,000, that we had met that minimum by about 9,000 people. So you can imagine how important it is going to be to make sure that everyone is counted in the Census 2020 count. So that is what is called as reapportionment. What a lot of other people then talk about is then redistricting. And that's then within a state or county or city looking at redrawing boundaries that provide equal distribution of the population within that group, depending on whatever aspect it could be. So again, we'll be looking at the federal redistricting. So we'll be looking at the U.S. House of Representatives and how those new seats would be lined up based on population. Likewise, the state House and Senate districts will be impacted by that count, as well as then within each county and city, different districts could be redrawn based on that population count. The other huge reason why the Census 2020 is important, especially to local governments, is that it's used in funding formulas for over $400 billion in allocation nationally based on census population counts. In Colorado, that comes out to about $8 billion annually and about $1,400 per person. Now, there's a lot of caveats to it, and there's a link at the bottom that gives you the website for where this information comes up. We can look and see some of the different programs, but really, I mean, the point behind this is that every single person, and that means from birth on, is counted in every single house, and that we do receive these federal dollars coming back to the state and local governments based on these counts. And there's a great product put out by George Washington University. It's called Counting for Dollars. And this is a little snapshot of what that document looks like. We're going to be sending out a copy of this document at the end of the session. This is something that can easily be printed. It's a 2-pager. The first page just gives you the information, backside kind of gives you all of the documentation. But this is a great 1-pager that can be shared with people across your community when you're looking at why does Census 2020 count, why does it matter in terms of looking at what that total count could be. For me then, obviously the redistricting, reapportionment money is all very important. But over the next 10 years, what we're going to be using those census counts is really to come up with our control totals, our denominators for rates, when we're looking at program evaluations. Likewise, like any grants that you might be filling out that then are based on areas of geography, this is going to be the base count for all of that work for the next 10 years. So making sure that the information is correct at these small levels of geography is going to be really very important for all of us, especially in local governments. So what have we been doing? I know it still seems that April of 2020 seems so far away, right? No, it is just 16 months away. And right now we've been doing work for the last 2 years in terms of preparing for Census 2020 in our office, in the State Demography Office. And 2 of the big programs that we have been working on is, one is geography based, so really looking at boundaries, and the other one is really looking at housing units. Under the boundaries, what we've been updating are all of the block boundaries, precinct boundaries, which both of those pieces are going to be used for redistricting purposes. Annually, hopefully, somebody from all of your local governments is participating with the Census Bureau in their program called Boundary and Annexation Survey. So for your local municipal boundaries, these are updated annually and used typically between January and March. This information is released and then you have to submit it back in. Make sure that you're staying up to date on this, because again, what we want to make sure is that when people are counted, they're counted in the right place, and that means making sure that the boundaries are updated. Then we've got this huge project coming up later this year. It's called PSAP, or Participant Statistical Area Programs, and this really comes to redefining what do the block groups, tracts, census designated places all look like. And I've got another slide that I'm going to quickly go over that in a second. But that's coming up this winter. We also just finished a program called Local Update of Census Addresses. So basically it's taking the Census Bureau's master address file and updating it with all of the local data that we could find. We submitted on behalf of the state over 65,000 changes or updates to addresses within the state. Likewise, there were over 40 local governments that also participated individually submitting data to the Census Bureau. We'll know by the end of the year how many of those were accepted for the state as a whole. Another program coming up late in 19 and early in 20 will be an update of new construction, so new housing units. Likewise, another program called Count Review, which it seems redundant, but really it isn't, is making sure that, once again, every single address has been included in that master address file and that they've got a connection or a response from every single address. This will then be used for what they call non-response follow-up if they can't find somebody that's responded from some of these addresses. And then there's a huge component in terms of education, marketing, and outreach that Lily will cover in a second. Just one additional component in terms of this program, Participant Statistical Area Program. I'm not going to go into any detail right now, only in that if you have follow-up questions, please get in touch with me now. This would be the time to do it. I mean, there's a whole session on PSAP, but this is the only time in the decade where we're able to update these geographies. You can see the graphic shows kind of the delineation of the different geographies available within the United States. And if you can imagine, there's data products available for every single geography. But think about it, even with some of the programs or grants that you guys are filling out, if, for example, you look at the track or the block group that you were pulling data for and you're like, God, what's included in there? And sometimes you'll see that the geography just doesn't make sense. This is the time in the decade to update these geographies. And obviously, all of this information is used for grants and planning. You should have received, highest elected officials should have received information this summer about invitation to participate. We'll be doing the trainings and delineation starting in January of 2019, closes out by July of 2019. So if you have interest at all in this product or program and you haven't heard anything about it yet, please feel free to get in touch with me after this session. So I think with that, oh no, one last slide for me. Colorado has developed a Census 2020 website. This gives you a view of what it looks like if you're at DOLA, and the link is at the very last slide in this presentation. But from this site, we'll have information throughout the years in terms of updates, in terms of what's going on within the state, any questions that you might have, programs, resources, census hiring information, everything that you might be interested in, we'll have available here on our website so that you'll be able to keep up to date in terms of what's going on with Census 2020 in Colorado. And with that, I am now going to turn it over to Lily.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, everyone. As stated, my name is Lily Griego. I'm with Census 2020, hired by the U.S. Census. Very excited to be here with you all this afternoon. And I'd like to begin by thanking our host, CML, for taking time to do this, doing all of the outreach to get everyone on the phone today with us for the webinar. It's extremely vital to Colorado's success that we have a conversation about this many, many times with very important people across the state to make sure that we have an accurate count. So my gratitude is extended to CML, to DOLA with Elizabeth, and also to each of you who took time out of your day to join us for this. A brief introduction. I know some of you, I've looked over the list of our attendees today, and I'm happy to see some familiar names. My background, I've worked in municipal government. I've also worked in county regional government here in the metro area, and born and raised here in Colorado. I worked with zoning enforcement. I did addressing for a city for a very long time. I've also been in some finance departments and worked with our local businesses and understand the constraints placed on our local staff here that works with local communities. So we have so much to do every single day and so many people to serve. So I just congratulate each of you for the work that you do to serve your communities. I was hired specifically to do outreach. So my background in outreach, I've been working statewide with local communities on a multitude of different levels recently, and that's what I'm going to continue to do for the census. Part of my outreach will be a little confusing for folks, and Elizabeth and I have been talking about this over the last few days. What does outreach look like for the census? At this point in time, we are on the first layer of our outreach. And what does that look like? It includes me giving a call to all of our local governments and saying, my name's Lily and I'm with the census, and I'd like to talk to your mayor. I'd like to speak with your county commissioners. I'd like to have a conversation about what's to come in 2020 with regard to the census. And the fun part about this is that my background complements the conversation, because very frequently I will be placed on hold, and in a couple of minutes I have a GIS person come on and say, how can I help you with your census or data request? So that is not the intention of my call. So I'm looking to partner with many of you in relaying to your elected officials, what is the Census Bureau currently looking for? We are looking to set up a CCC committee, or it's a little redundant. You'll see it on bullet number 2, Complete Count Committee. So we call it a CCC. And I'm going to come to that in a couple of minutes, why we're doing that. But the purpose is to have local trusted people in the community who form a committee and come together to identify a hard to count population, something that we'll also be talking about here in just a few moments. And my role is really to engage your local elected officials to talk about the opportunity that they have to really leave a legacy for 2020 in your local communities. And it can be a community as big as the city and county of Denver to some of our smaller communities. I just had a stop in Crestone, Colorado, and I noticed as we pulled over in the middle of nowhere on a snowy or a chilly Sunday night, and the population on the 2010 census was 120 some people. So I thought that was kind of fun to look up the census data while I was traveling throughout Colorado. So why do we do that formation? That's my role. It's to talk about your purpose for the census with your local elected officials and do the formation of the CCC. Now, Elizabeth and I talked a little bit about this. I'm going to skip to the next slide. I'm not going to be reading each of these for you, but we talked about what are some of the changes to these and why it's important to have a conversation with your top elected official. And you'll see some bullet points again here on your computers. Fewer regional offices. So yes, the actual information is that Colorado will have 4 offices that we know of right now. The first one is called our Denver office. And I want to back up a little bit and let you know that Colorado is part of a 12-state region. So during the 2010 census, we were part of a 10-state region. So we've acquired 2 more. We are the largest geographic region for the United States Census. And Denver is going to be able to host one of our early offices. So we're pretty excited about that. But geographically speaking, it's actually in the city of Lakewood. We'll also have one in Aurora. And by the way, the Lakewood office is an early office. So we'll come to that on the timeline here in a moment. But Aurora will have an office. Colorado Springs will have an office. And Northern Colorado will also have an office. And so we're going to come back to what do the offices do and how can you help us staff up our offices and ensure that we are doing everything that we can do to get an accurate count for Colorado through our addresses. Through our offices. The next thing I want to really draw attention to is something that I think is exciting. We're going to have internet response for the first time ever. So 2020 is setting a great tone by keeping up with the technology that we have right now available to us. Folks can then sign on to the internet, do the self-response, 11 questions, less than 11 minutes, and be done with this. And then you can see a note at the bottom. They won't hear from us after that. For folks who do not have access to the internet, and I think this is really imperative to talk about some of our mountain regions, some of our counties and cities that are in southern Colorado that may not have good internet reception or access to a personal home computer, they can dial in and do a response by phone. Again, 11 questions done in less than 11 minutes, and we're going to have 12 languages plus English on the phone. So I think that's really important to share with community members. And of course, the time-tested, very true paper response. So if you have any questions on any of that, by all means, feel free to type them in now. We'll be coming to questions and answers soon, but I think it's important that we not forget any questions that you may have. And likely, if you have a question, somebody else on the phone does as well. So what is a complete count committee? You'll see a chart here that talks about, or a couple notes here, who, what, when. I think it's important to just re-emphasize, right now we are reaching out to your top elected official in your community. So I did see we have some folks attending from the city of Aurora. Well, we know that Aurora has a new mayor, and we know that we have a dynamic city council there. So what have we done there? Staff from the census has sat down with folks in the city of Aurora. We've already met with the Aurora mayor, and the CCC is what we call information. Lakewood is doing the same thing, and Lakewood is going to be a very important CCC for us because they're going to have that office. Elizabeth, who you just heard speak a few moments ago, is in the middle of doing the state CCC. And I think that information has been shared broadly about what it looks like to join that state CCC and why it's so vital that we have different community members from the entire state represented on the CCC for Colorado. What is it? It's a broad spectrum of amazing people that come together from the community who are all kinds of different contributors to what our local folks are doing to make sure that communities are thriving. It can be elected officials. I've actually met with one town who's opted not to have elected officials. We can look at internal city members or county members who work within the staffing department and understand what happens inside of a local government. It can be nonprofit people who come to the table who understand different community needs. It can be advocates for different kinds of advocacy within a community. And it can be folks who perhaps have spent their whole lives working, doing different things in a community and now are retired. And then they bring something to the table that maybe somebody else wouldn't at this point in time. So it's not limited to any one person, but it is really meant to generate why is a census important to the state of Colorado or to your local community. The formation is happening now, and I think that that's one of the most important points I can drive home. So, for example, I have met with the state, and we're excited. Elizabeth can share with folks how Colorado has just really set the tone for this 12-state region. We have an executive order from Governor Hickenlooper. And then looking at the city and county of Denver, I'm really excited to announce that we have a proclamation from the mayor and the city council there. And so they're moving the needle on setting a tone that the census is vital to our success over the next decade. And so then we're looking to other communities to do the same. So for example, I met recently with the mayor in Lakewood, and we had a very brief interaction, and we talked about why is the census important to you and why is it important to the members of Lakewood. After that meeting, I did a follow-up meeting, and the city manager was invited to join, and we talked about the formation, the challenges that each community will face, which some are going to be the same challenges from one point of the state to the other, but some are going to be highly unique. And again, this comes into mind if you're on the Eastern Plains. Maybe you have significant difference in between homes, or if you're in the mountains, your geographic challenges there with the weather in the Rocky Mountain region. Or if you're in Denver, one of the challenges that we have here is our rapid growth. And you did hear Elizabeth speak about the addresses. So you can imagine if we've had 3,000 people moving to the state of Colorado over a very significant amount of time every single month, how many different addresses we have to talk about right now. It's pretty significant. So again, some are going to be the same challenges, some are going to be different. The other thing that I look for, which I hope is really exciting for all of us, are to talk about opportunities. And again, this is going to come from local communities because you are the expert in your area. So you're going to know these opportunities better than I will. But what I do is I come out and I sit down and we have a discussion about who should be on your committee. When should it be formed? Again, now. What should it look like? That's unique to your community. There isn't a magic formula to this. And then once you start talking about the formation, I will serve as a technical advisor or a facilitator and help you generate the actual completeness of your committee and then strategize a plan. I come out and I do a 2-hour training, which I think is a lot of fun for us to do together. And then once we have that, then I continue to move around the state, by the way, doing that. So if you haven't seen or heard about me coming into your community, I'm on my way, I'm trying to get there as much as we can. But one of the things we want to note is that this is imperative that we get geared up and that we're ready for 2019, all of the work that we have ahead of us to get the word out about the census so that when 2020 rolls around, Colorado really delivers for our residents here in Colorado. Okay. So again, talking about the structure, we kind of already mentioned most of these, but one of the things we haven't talked about is hard to count groups. And you'll see that on the first bullet. So it's hard to count, not hard to count, communities. And I'm going to go over a slide here in a minute that talks about Roam. And Roam is an interactive tool that we have that I think a lot of folks are going to really enjoy looking at. It really identifies where we have some heavy lifting to do. And this is where our partnerships come into play. So we just talked about the structure of the Complete Count Committee. We just talked about forming the partnership between local communities and the census. So how does this play out together? We're going to utilize the data that we have in place in order to effectively utilize our resources. And so that's what the hard to count label is meant to identify. Where do we have more work to do than others? Where do we have a need from our community to do something maybe a little different in our outreach? So some of those things would be identified with the hard to count. And one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize, building coalitions. And that's, you kind of already heard me talk about it, but this is going to have kind of a multi-layer effect within your local community. So Aurora really comes to mind. If you think about the diversity that we have in Aurora, it means that we also have a diverse type of outreach that we need to effectively implement, and we need to do so with some strategy, and we need to think about how we're approaching different communities and talking to them where they are, meeting them where they are, and answering the questions that they have, especially folks that may not have done the census for 2010. So these are just really important questions that we need to identify together. I love this graphic. So this is the formation of the CCC, and I think it just really brings home what are we looking for. And again, no way that we have of saying there's a perfect formula, but these are some time-tested things that we have found that make a successful CCC. And you'll see it's pretty diverse. So veterans, immigrant, and again, these go to advocates, these go to state employees, federal employees, city employees, community organizations, the business sector. This includes our chambers, faith-based leaders. And again, I'm going to refer back to Denver. So the mayor there has appointed 3 co-chairs to really lead this conversation for the committee as it comes into formation. And in the city and county of Denver, our 3 co-chairs are a city council member, a reverend, so from our faith-based community, and you'll see education immediately to the left of the faith-based circle down in your lower right-hand portion of the slide. So we have the president of Metropolitan State University of Denver, and this has been a really fun conversation. This is her first CCC. It's her first census in Colorado, and she's just really excited about the opportunity and the challenges that she has ahead, considering not only her role on the CCC, but the arduous task of what do we do when we are counting our students who are in Colorado, utilizing our facilities and, using our roads. And we want to make sure that we're getting an accurate count of those students while they're here celebrating Colorado. So we'll come back to that if y'all have any questions, but let's move on to our tools. So you may have heard me mention just a couple of minutes ago, you may not have seen me yet. We are going to be staffing up rather quickly, and I'm going to come to that in a couple of minutes as well. But if you haven't heard about us, haven't had somebody visit your local community, please do not feel like you are alone. We have tools available on the internet that you can access as of today. And so we've identified a few on here. You also will see the partnership toolkit is in the lower right-hand side for the link to access it. If you just go to, and I think that we all know at this point in time, you don't have to type in the entire link. It's census.gov is, oh my gosh, a myriad of information. You could spend hours, I do spend hours visiting this website and just taking in all of the knowledge and all of the work that we have ahead of us. It's very exciting stuff, but it can be a little overwhelming. So I invite you to take an opportunity to look at the toolkit, reach out if you have any questions, and know that Elizabeth covered in one of her slides a little while ago, how do we see the benefits of the census in Colorado? Well, we see it in education, we see it in our roads and bridges, we see the dollars coming through each community in this way. So we need to make sure that we are geared up and ready to go and educated on how we have conversations with people in our communities on different levels. And so that's what some of these tools are intended to do. Okay. Yay, the fun part of the presentation, ROAM, Response Outreach Area Mapping System. And I like this graphic because I think it just really brings home what is a hard to count community. Hard to count folks are not what immediately come to mind. So Denver, for example, the very first thing that comes to mind is that we have a high renter population. The education levels and the earning levels and all kinds of different data that we can talk about when we talk about statistics are not what we automatically think of when we think of hard to count communities. But a high renter population is a highly transient population, which will make them hard to count. So if you take a look at this graphic, you'll see some dark blue sections. And the dark blue sections really note a hard to count community. And so what we do when we do our CCC training is we identify in each local community on this system, and this isn't a live system, this is just a graphic just intended to give you a snapshot in time. But what we'll do is each CCC will pull up your local community, we'll identify where are your hard to count communities and why are they hard to count. So again, you can't see it here, but we have layers upon layers of information that identify for us what makes your your community hard to count? And then we'll strategize with you on your CCC about what we can do, and we can proactively take measures to address that hard to count community and meet them where they are to make sure that everyone is counted once, counted in the right place, and make sure that they are part of the census accurate count for Colorado. Okay, if you have any questions on that, we'll come back to it. Where can I use you? In recruitment. So part of our timeline, you'll see in a couple minutes, said that in early September, our jobs line would go live. Well, we've already met that, so it's live. 2020census.gov/jobs. We are in the midst of hiring. So last week I was scrambling to get information out. I'm really excited to see that DOLA already has it on their website. We are hiring people to do what I do, partnership specialists. We're also hiring media specialists. So we're going to have folks working within the state of Colorado doing similar jobs to what I'm doing right now. But one of the things I really want to highlight, this is just the first wave. We have got wave upon wave upon wave coming for hiring. And we really need our partners within the state of Colorado to help us get the message out. Why? This is one of our biggest challenges. While we have amazing jobs, an amazing team, yes, I'm bragging a little because I think it's a fun team, we have a lot of fun work. So currently I work at home, and I think that's very appealing to a lot of people. But one of the things I want to say is how busy we are. It's very similar to a campaign. You gear up and you hit the road running, and you've got work to do for days, and every single day goes by very quickly and very, exciting pace. But your list of to-dos is just growing. So we're going to have a good network, a good cohort of people doing this. But where's the challenge? We've got 3% and under on unemployment rates. So 2010, we talked about the differences back from 2010 to 2020. They didn't face the same challenge in 2010. So we're looking to partner with folks in your local communities and get the word out. Maybe you have some retirees in your community who want work. Maybe you have college students who've just recently graduated, and while Lyft and Uber are a lot of fun to drive for, maybe this is a new opportunity. So right now, as I mentioned, partnership specialists similar to what I do, media specialists, but this goes back to the offices. So you may recall that I mentioned Aurora, Lakewood, and Colorado Springs will have offices. We're going to have office managers. We're going to have clerks. We're going to have everything in between hiring up. And again, I really want to emphasize this is competitive pay. Yes, they're temporary jobs, but they're temporary through 2020. So it's not temporary in a short term. It's a 2-year commitment at this point in time, just under 2 years. And the pay, as I mentioned, is very competitive. So this is great opportunity for each of us to take time to share with our community members about some great opportunities where they can further their professional careers. Or if, like I mentioned, retirees, this is a great thing for them to come into the workforce and say, look, this is what I've already contributed to Colorado, and I want to keep giving a little bit more for the next couple years and have some fun while I'm doing it. And the work is vital. So just really wanted to accentuate the opportunity to work together on the partnership for employment. So Elizabeth and I spoke this morning, and we did hire a PR firm. I am not going to go into a ton of detail on this, but I do want to share with you something that I think is going to be really important for each of you. For example, when we met with the City of Denver and City of Aurora, budget is the very first thing that comes to mind when we start talking about 2019 and 2020 for local government. And some of the questions that we have received, and I know Elizabeth was sharing with me that she's received these questions while they've been working around Colorado as well. How do we develop this information? Are we going to have a logo? Does each individual community have to develop a logo? How does this work? How do we get materials out? So in answer to your questions, yes, the census has hired a PR firm. I am going to solidify some information and circle back with CML and with DOLA and with each of you as I come out to meet with you. But I believe that early October, and we didn't even have that information first thing this morning, we're going to start to see some of this information come out from the PR firm working with the Census Bureau, where we are going to have a logo. You can see actually to the left there is the United States Census Bureau on your slides. But we're going to have some informational pieces coming out that we'll be sending out to each of you that can be shared with your local community. And then for those of you who've been around for 2010, 2000, and a lot of my cohort that I met nationwide who actually did the 1990 census, they have posters that you can put in place, really speaking to your community. And I think that I saw them around our headquarters in Dallas, and they were just so moving and so thoughtfully done. And so I think you'd be really honored to have these hanging in your local government offices or in your local communities in different places, really encouraging people to understand what is the census and why is it important to me. And you'll see the note again that we really want to drive home. We are hiring a media specialist. So if you have anybody, I'll send out the link one more time to CML and DOLA. And I actually will emphasize that it's on DOLA's census page, that they already have the link there. It is open as of right now. So we're looking for some amazing talent in that position because it's going to be a pivotal role to fill. Okay, so what are critical steps and what's next? This is kind of a timeline that I have touched upon lightly throughout this entire conversation. We are in the midst of recruitment right now. That's our fourth bullet point under 2018 for hiring for the offices. Recruiting assistants is another position that we are doing right now statewide. So if you know someone who's great at HR and they want to be doing recruitment for the census, this is a great opportunity for them. Partnership specialists, someone who understands the importance of engagement, community engagement, engaging with elected officials and folks within communities to form partnerships and build coalitions. Tribal at large, I want to just lightly cover this, and you'll see tribal leader at the top of this as well. We actually have tribal specialists. So these are folks, I traveled to Wind River Reservation up in Wyoming recently with a colleague of mine, and we did a CCC training there at the reservation. So we actually have folks working specifically with tribal leaders within the 12-state region. 2019, again, I'm not going to read through this bullet by bullet. I don't think anybody would be thoroughly entertained with me reading on your lunch hour. But I think what would be important to emphasize is the fact that we have a ton of work to do. And it seems like we're getting out early, but if you think about the opportunities that we have to, number one, focus on how to form our CCCs, get them trained, then get them mobilized and ready to act in 2019, time is of the essence. So that's the biggest thing that I can drive home is how important it is to get our partnerships established and in place and our CCCs in formation. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead to the next one. So we did touch upon lightly the advertising campaign, and you'll see in 2020, it mentions in early 2020, we're going to really hit the ground running in 2020. So you will see a statewide emphasis on getting out the word in a multitude of different ways. And by this time, our CCs are really up and running, and they've been doing some activities in 2019, probably attending some events in their local communities, and really acting in a method that supports the 2020 census in your local community. Let's see, they also are supporting the self-response, so I want to go back to, you'll see down below, April 1st is Census Day. However, just 2 bullets ahead of that, CCCs encourage self-response, that's the March 23rd deadline. So March 23rd, our online and our phone lines will go live. So we want to make sure that early self-response is what we're focusing on. And I'll be talking about that with each of the CCCs that I'm meeting with. There is also a thank you campaign at the bottom of this page. You'll notice that. And that will be from latter part of I would say April, early May through July to thank our community partners for everything that they've done. And let's see. I'm going to go ahead and come back to any questions on this one just to be cognizant of our time together. So you'll see again here I've highlighted in red, March 23rd is our self-response. We are currently gearing up to open up our offices. The biggest thing I can drive home is our recruitment, our formation of CCCs. One thing we haven't touched upon is our group quarters. So you may see early 2020 just above the March 23rd deadline, not to drive that home again, self-response starts March 23rd. But early in 2020, group quarters will start. What are group quarters? Well, there will be a concerted effort that will actually come out of our area census offices. Say that 3 times fast. So the group quarters, different things come to mind, but these are organized facilities where people live together. And so some folks have asked us, how are you going to be assessing the homeless? How are you going to be assessing safe houses? we have taken all of that into consideration and have a plan for that. And again, we can cover that in the CCC training specifically, or if you have any specific questions today, we can circle back to that. You'll note at the bottom of the slides, so once we have all of our data complete, the count goes to the president December 31st, 2020, and the information comes back into Colorado at the April 1st, 2021 deadline. What we have not touched upon during this presentation, and I'm going to leave this slide up while I cover this, are what are the challenges that we're going to face right now. You've heard me talk a little bit about hard to count communities, but one of the things that we haven't talked about is the lack of trust right now that's occurring with federal government or government as a whole. And some of you may see this in your daily activities dealing with the public. So with a transient, meaning high rental population or younger population, you'll see that folks are not highly in tune with engaging with the government. And again, it's been 10 years since we've done this in 2010, well, almost. But why do people understand that they need to do the census? It's only going to be on us taking it upon ourselves to really do a high level of education on why this counts. And this is going to go back to each of us talking about that Colorado is likely to get another congressional district out of this. And you heard Elizabeth talk about that. So our House of Representatives shifts based on population, of course. That comes from our Constitution. And this count has been going on every 10 years since 1790. So we really want to drive home the fact that Colorado's population will likely, we're not 100% sure, but we're pretty darn sure that we're going to equate to another congressional district. But then this comes down to your local communities. Ballpark, Elizabeth mentioned a number of about $1,400 per person per year. So this is a really significant opportunity for us to really bring home some federal dollars into our local communities in all kinds of different methods of touching our populations here. And again, we wanted to talk about roads and bridges. We wanted to talk about education. We wanted to talk about the federal grants that come into our local governments. And then, you know, the local government gets the opportunity to decide how that money is used. So these are different ways that we see the results. But the idea that folks don't know what the census is and they have distrust is going to be one of our biggest challenges, which is why we talk about trusted voices and the formation, the accurate and well thought out formation of the CCC. So in order to get to our Q&A, I'm going to just leave that. The one thing I wanted to mention with that, that Elizabeth and I touched upon, is something that many of you may know, but not everyone. The census data has never been breached. And I think really talking about the fact that the idea that this is protected information is one of the most important messages we can deliver. So for example, I think it's important to share with you all that when I became a census employee, I took an oath for life. The oath is not through the end of 2020. The oath is not through the end of the census 2020. It is not when I terminate my employment. And by the way, I took one of those temporary jobs. So in August of 2020, I will no longer be working for the census. The oath is for life to protect the data. If I violate that, I'm subject to punishment. So what does that look like? I can be fined a minimum of $250,000, or I can face imprisonment. This is why we take our work so seriously. The work that we're about to undertake is vital to the success of Colorado and our local governments, and has long-term lasting consequences, both positive and unintended. Why do we share that with you? Because we want you to know, and we want everyone in Colorado to know, that this information is protected information. So I'm going to go ahead and close with that and say thank you once again, and let's open it up for Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Lily, and thank you, Elizabeth. So as of this moment, we do not have any questions, so I'll leave it open for just a few moments to see if anyone would like to type anything in. Best guess, this is early and there's a lot going on, and so the questions will probably come as time passes. So I do want to remind everyone you can always reach out to CML if you have questions about the census. We'll probably end up directing you either to Elizabeth or to Lily. Let's see, do you have your contact information there?
Sure, and in the meantime, while we're waiting for a couple of questions to roll in, folks, this is Lily. I can go back to a couple of tidbits that I shared, or didn't share just yet, and that is that Census is on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, And I think it's really fun to get in there. We have some great videos that we've already been sharing on Instagram that folks can just repost. We have information about the hiring done on Facebook. And so if folks know of like family members that are looking for work, maybe you live in Fort Collins, but you have family members who live in San Luis Valley. And so if you just reshare or repost our information, then you can just tag somebody and say, hey, by the way, did you see this is coming down the pike? And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that Twitter is really a fun place for us. So what we have is every day we're putting out fun stuff of how is census data used. And so I think that that's really fun stuff that we can talk about on Twitter. And I think with that, we have our first question.
All right, it looks like, who in city government would I contact? The city clerk. I'm not 100% sure what you mean by contacting to participate in a complete count committee. Let's see.
So while we have that question clarified, I'm going to take a shot, and we might get this wrong, but hopefully you'll clarify that for us. As I mentioned, one of the things that we've been talking about that Elizabeth and I have done with our outreach is that we talk to a multitude of different people at different levels. Okay, hang tight, folks. So I'm going to go ahead and finish. So with that thought that there are a multitude of different folks. There are the folks that deal with the data, and I'm going to ask Elizabeth to speak to that. And with the outreach right now, we're really in a position to reach out to community leaders, i.e. your mayor, your county commissioners, and in tandem with that meeting that I request would be a city manager or a town administrator, something along those lines. A city clerk, we know your role. Your role is vital. You are the liaison between the public and the government, and you hold a lot of informational pieces that are vital to the success and operation of your government. So of course, if you want a one-on-one kind of meeting, or if you want one-on-one follow-up, I think that your role would be pivotal to making sure that the CCC is successful. And then I defer to Elizabeth if she'd like to elaborate on the other pieces.
So I completely agree in terms of the question related to where do you start and if there's questions. And I think a lot of it all depends on, some of what are the questions, what are the concerns. Certainly on the marketing and outreach side with the complete count committees, I think that, obviously the leaders of the community are vital in that piece. But again, there's so many components to Census 2020, certainly on a data, boundaries side of the question. Typically it's going to be your planners or your GIS folks that have been involved in that area. And there's one question that came in from Dencia. Is that how you say the name? I think maybe Dencia in Akron. Mm-hmm. It says, hello, thank you for your time. I'm a rural town and still struggling with confirming addresses due to no staff. Do you know who I can contact to help with that? So I will tell you the situation with the local update of census addresses has completed. So, and for both you and for me. So we had two different timelines. I had a different timeline, and my deadline was mid-August. And so I think right now that there's not a lot that can be done in terms of updating those addresses. However, what I will tell you is that if you know that you've got a list of housing units that are different, yours are different than what the Census Bureau had, keep that information available. And my contact information is on this slide deck. Let's get on email and start talking, because what we can do is there's one more final phase called count review. And what we can do is if those housing units are in that group, we can then include you in the count review component. So let's probably take this offline and talk. And it says only missed 10 residents, but you know what I'm going to tell you?
Let's do the math.
10 residents is huge, and especially for Akron. If you think of, let's round it up to $1,500 per person, an average household size of 2.5, That means that it's about $4,500, $4,000 per housing unit per year. You go 10 years, that takes you to $40,000, and then you're missing 10. Okay, 400,000. So that is why it's so important to count every single housing unit and every single person, because you have to do the math, and you're like, holy cow, this means a lot to not only my city and county planning, but to dollars and everything else. So,
and I think that that's really a great point to raise about Akron. So Akron was in the papers last week, and you have the most affordable housing market right now in Colorado is how it was identified, if I'm not mistaken. And so what does that look like with a market that has, and I mentioned the number of 3,000 people moving here per month in the last couple of years, and we know that number is slowing down, but people love Colorado. People also are willing to drive. I know people who commute to Denver from Fort Collins and Greeley every single day. And if they're willing to drive that distance, think about the fact that a house in Akron costs around $140,000 a year, $140,000. They may be willing to do that drive if they can find employment in the metro area. And that means that Akron is likely, maybe, I'm just speculating on this, to see a housing boom. Meet people moving out there. So that's where that number comes into play, because the next census is 2030. So I think that you raise a really important point in Akron. Every single person counts. And we've talked about the other thing that I really want to draw attention to, we've talked about in other meetings that I didn't mention here today, is the undercounted are the underserved. Those who will not be counted. Children was one that was mentioned in another meeting. The number of children not counted are those who are underserved. So the document that I really want you all to look at after we spend some time together today is that Counting for Dollars document that CML is going to be amazing and get out to you. You'll see SNAP on there, you'll see WIC, you'll see some acronyms that you're very familiar with in your local governments, and those who are not counted are underserved. I cannot emphasize that enough. So I think you raise a valid point. And from the census side, we have an entire geography department, and some folks are here in Colorado. I'll follow up with them and make sure that we get the question answered from our perspective as well.
All right, wonderful. Well, I think those might be all the questions for today. In addition to putting this information on our website, definitely keep an eye on the CML newsletter every time we get an update from either Elizabeth's office or Lily's office. As a municipal research analyst for CML, I have a research corner, so I can dedicate space to the census to make sure everyone here remains updated and also be that much easier to share with others in your community. So the PowerPoint and recording for this training will be on our website by the end of the week. It'll be under training materials. So thank you all for joining us today. This now concludes the webinar, and I wish you a lovely afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
thank you.